Gentlemen, may I have your attention, please? Thank you. Very excited about this next Aspen Security Forum conversation. We're honored to have Tom Costello if you're Irish, Costello if you're American, he's not Italian, who's with our wonderful partner NBC to interview the TSA administrator, Mr. David Pekoske, who's just been voted to his second 5-year term, not voted, but joined to that. And we're looking forward to a great conversation. Please help me welcome them to the stage.
Thank you very much. I'm Tom Costello, as we say in the States. In Ireland, it's Costello. Only a good Irish lady would know that, but you're absolutely right. I cover aviation and space for NBC News, and I've covered the TSA now for 17 years, and Admiral David Pekoske is in his second term now as the TSA administrator. In shorthand, on TV, I call that the TSA chief, because I think the average American would think an administrator, like he answers the phones? No, he runs the place. And he runs an agency of, 60,000 employees. 60,000, right. And I think it's important to remind the audience, the TSA was stood up after 9/11 on 2001, and immediately, within just a few months, you were dealing with, or your predecessors were dealing with, a very serious shoe bomber attempt in December of 2001. In 2006, the attempt to detonate explosives in soda bottles on a plane. The attempted bombing in 2010 of a U.S. cargo plane with explosives, you may recall, in a printer cartridge. The U.S. was warned about that by Saudi intelligence, thankfully. And the TSA has dealt with, as we all know, and I've been on the scene of many of these, shootings at airports, checkpoints, physical attacks on passengers, airlines, and airport employees. And you are screening right now roughly 2 to 2.5 million people a day, depending on the day. Mm-hmm. So we just went through Thanksgiving, pretty smooth sailing, and now everybody in this audience online is wondering, what about Christmas? How is it going to proceed for the typical viewer and the typical passenger coming in on over the Christmas holidays?
Well, first, Tom, thanks for the Coast Guard analogy, smooth sailing over Thanksgiving, and I would expect the very same over Christmas. What we did over Thanksgiving is we asked for volunteers across our entire workforce that were certified as officers that could do our screening operations to go to other airports that might need more help. And so over Thanksgiving, we had about 1,000 people that volunteered, and we deployed them around the system, and we'll have probably a little bit less than that because the Christmas holiday is a little bit longer over Christmas, but I expect it will be smooth sailing as well.
The airlines are still struggling with staffing issues. What about TSA? You're operating right now at about 8% below your optimal level of staffing. Will you have enough TSA officers over the Christmas break and into New Year?
We'll have enough over the Christmas break, and Christmas is already baked in. I mean, there's not much we can do between now and Christmas to bring somebody on, because for us, you can hire somebody. It's a government hiring process, so it takes a little bit longer, but the certification process can take 5 months. So the workforce that we have today is the workforce we're going to see over Christmas. But to your point, Tom, yeah, we're about 8% below our staffing, the staffing levels we'd like to have, given the passenger volume. We've been working very, very hard to recruit and bring people in, but like every organization in the United States, it's hard to do that. So we're hoping to recover a little bit more over the springtime.
Well, you've also got a bit of a challenge, because TSA officers, many people may not realize, they make about 30% less than a typical federal employee. And given the very tough jobs market right now, in other words, it's a full jobs market, you can't find enough employees. Private companies are struggling to do that. How does the TSA hold on to employees when the federal government is paying these officers less than people in other positions across the government? And this is a tough job, day in and day out.
Yeah, it makes it really hard to retain the talent we have, and we're starting to see that in our checkpoints. We're starting to see the average level of experience in terms of number of years go down, so that's a concern. And we have a proposal, the President submitted a proposal in the fiscal 23 budget that we hope the Congress enacts in the omnibus legislation that we hope to see before the end of the year that will fix that pay disparity. But to your point, if you took the work that a transportation security officer does and went through the government process to figure out what grade level that person should be, and then you compared the pay is about 30% less. So it's very hard not just to retain, but you can imagine how hard that makes it to recruit as well.
What about just the challenge of providing upward mobility for a typical TSA officer? Because everybody wants to feel like they can progress in their career. Is there enough upward mobility to make this an attractive career for young people?
Yeah, I think we can provide more upward mobility opportunities, but importantly, we need to provide more upward mobility communications. And we've been doing that over the past year and a half, and we're starting to see some really good results of that because we have folks that came into the agency at the entry level as TSOs. In some cases, are members of the senior executive service. And so those paths for people are definitely there. We just need to do a better job of communicating it. But the other thing is, in my career experience, I would not have had some of the opportunities that I had if it wasn't for somebody else looking out for me and somebody else saying, hey, there's an opportunity over here. I think you'd be pretty good for it. You really ought to try and see if you could get that job, or I'll help you get that job. We're trying to institute that culture into TSA as well.
But the TSA is not the Coast Guard. I mean, you rose to become Vice Commandant of the Coast Guard. There aren't as many layers of possibility of promotions in TSA.
But there aren't that many fewer. I mean, there are, somebody comes into TSA and we're in a pay banding system, so you come in as a D band. When you get up to the SES, you're past the K band, right? So there are a number of steps on the way up. That provides more pay, more responsibility on the way up. Like I said, we just need to do a better job of creating some of those opportunities for sure, and then communicating that we've created them and the opportunity there.
Among the many stories that we have covered at NBC News and our competitors have covered, really this explosion of violence in airports, onboard planes over the last few years. In 2001, the FAA reported 1,100 investigations of aggressive, even physical violence on board planes. That's the highest on record. So far this year, 2,200 reports, 767 investigations. And now we are past the mask mandate, which was one of the biggest reasons why people were misbehaving. Why is this still a problem? Why do we still have people acting up and becoming violent on planes?
Well, I think it's a societal problem in general. And one of the things that we always felt in TSA, when the mask mandate was in place, most of those instances, particularly in flight, were verbal arguments, verbal assaults, if you will. But what we've always tracked is the physical assaults, and the physical assaults really are much higher than they were pre-pandemic. And since the mask mandate has expired, we're still seeing physical assaults on board aircraft. You see them reported in the news all the time. So I just think they have a much shorter level of patience than they've ever had before. And you got a lot of people too that, as the makeup of passengers has changed, because more passengers now are leisure passengers that might not travel as often as a business passenger, I think that's created some conflict too. A business traveler has it figured out. They know exactly what to do on an aircraft. There's certain standards that we all kind of abide by as we travel often. Less so the case with leisure travelers, particularly people traveling in large groups. So I think that all of this contributes to the issue. Bottom line, though, is both FAA and TSA are working every day to do what we can do to make it come down.
And the FAA and the TSA have adopted a zero-tolerance policy. What does that mean? Does it mean that you give nobody any warnings? First offense, and you're going to be referred for prosecution? What does that mean?
That means that in every single case, we always do an investigation because you always want to make sure you have your facts right. And when the investigation shows that a civil penalty is warranted, in every single case, we proceed with a civil penalty. If the conduct is particularly egregious, we work with U.S. attorneys around the country to pursue criminal charges and criminal prosecution. And we talk about that a lot because we want to provide a deterrent to this behavior for others.
To that end, TSA officers are not law enforcement officers. You don't carry a gun. You don't have handcuffs. But the federal air marshals do report to the TSA. They do carry guns. They do carry badges. And they're on an undisclosed number of flights across the country or internationally at any one time. And we have reported over the last year or so, some federal air marshals have felt the need to break their cover and to intervene in the case of instances where passengers were behaving badly. But that sets up a real conflict or a challenge for the air marshals, doesn't it? Because I guess the concern is this could be a ruse. This could be an attempt to distract them from a real hijacking attempt like we had with 9/11.
Yeah, you're exactly right, Tom. I mean, we have air marshals on flights, certain number of flights, and we use a risk-based process to figure out which flights those air marshals need to be deployed on. And sometimes there are 2, sometimes there are 4, 6, or more, depending on the particular circumstance. We have protocols between the cabin crew, the flight tech, and our air marshals as to when they need to break cover. It's rare that they will, for the very reason that you cited. I mean, our concern is somebody trying to hijack an aircraft or do damage that might be catastrophic to that aircraft overall. We don't want all eyes going on somebody that's engaged in a physical assault that looks like it'll resolve itself over the next few minutes while nobody's watching the flight deck door or watching the other passengers in the aircraft.
So then you're relying on the passengers to help the flight crew stop this.
We are, and we also rely very much, and I think the unsung heroes of all of this have been the flight attendants and the gate agents. Mm-hmm. I mean, gate agents first, that when they see somebody that to them indicates that they are not ready to be in an aircraft, just not allowing entry into the aircraft, and we see more and more situations like that. So good on the gate agents for making that judgment. And then secondly, for the flight attendants, and we work really closely with flight attendants to provide them training in self-defense. They have their own training programs to how to de-escalate situations. But I would carry it just one step further, too. We have seen assaults in our checkpoint operations, too. And so we train our officers, and we're going to be doing a lot more of this, as to how do you see a situation developing and try to de-escalate it as quickly as you can. Yeah. Because anytime there's any activity, either in an aircraft or in a checkpoint, in a checkpoint in particular, it's going to slow the whole process down and impact hundreds of people.
You mentioned the self-defense training, and I've been at the Federal Air Marshals training the flight attendant crews in self-defense, and it's no joke. I mean, they are literally learning how to karate chop people and block them and throw them to the ground if necessary. Does that work? Do the flight attendants feel like that gives them the kind of capability they need to defend themselves and defend the rest of the passengers?
Yeah, I think it works. I mean, and I would say that because we have a lot of demand from flight attendants to receive that training, and we try to. Sometimes we bring them into our Federal Air Marshal field offices for the training. What's even better in a lot of cases is to go to their training center and train them right in their training center as well. We get a little bit more time to do that. They're within their own environment. The other thing that's really important about that training is for flight attendants and our air marshals to get to know each other a little bit too, because more familiarity in terms of just the conversations you have, a discussion of procedures and things like that is really beneficial in an operational situation.
All right, let's talk about guns confiscated at checkpoints. And we are set to break, or you are set to break, another record this year. So far this year, at last check, 4,600 guns have been recovered at airport checkpoints, and 87% were loaded. Last year, 6,000 guns were recovered. That's averaging 17 every single day. And these cases, if they're prosecuted, are prosecuted locally, not federally. But why is this such a problem? And are we really supposed to believe that all these people simply forgot that they had a gun in their carry-on?
Yeah, so we're going to break last year's record, which last year broke the prior year's record for the number of firearms we find in our checkpoints. And the universal comment from passengers that we discover a firearm in their carry-on bag is, I forgot it was there. So not everybody can have the same story. It just is not believable for everybody. Again, we do an investigation on these. Most egregious situations will get prosecuted by the U.S. attorneys, but it has to be really egregious for that to happen. And in every single one of those cases, we do pursue a civil penalty after an investigation. The real concerning part about all this is, and you mentioned it, Tom, is that 86% of these firearms are loaded. So that means there's a round in the chamber or a magazine is inserted into the weapon. That's particularly hazardous. We had a situation in Atlanta Airport where the passenger actually knew that his firearm was in his carry-on bag. We pulled it aside for a search. He reached over, went to grab for his firearm. We don't know for what purpose yet, but a round went off. Fortunately, the round went into the table and didn't injure anybody. But I just think of all the people traveling through checkpoints that a round discharge, one, is going to create panic as you would expect, and most importantly, it could really injure or kill somebody.
Yeah, that suspect then fled the Atlanta airport, and that meant that I spent 2 days at the Atlanta airport as the country was looking for this suspect. Does this depend often on the gun laws in that state? In other words, based on some states where they have looser gun laws, do you see an uptick there versus other states?
Yeah, there's definitely a correlation there. States that have looser gun laws, to your characterization, generally have higher numbers of firearms detected in checkpoints.
Talk to me a little bit about the international element to your job. We've got a lot of international attendees here in person and also online, and the TSA works very closely with your international partners, other airports around the world, airlines, and you're all, as I understand it, you've been working for years to try to get everybody to adhere to a single policy, a single standard as it relates to airport and airline security and screening. How much is that working today? How much progress have you made to get a single global standard so that we're all on the same page?
That's worked really well. I mean, we all work, all member states, to an organization called ICAO, which is the International Civil Aviation Organization, based up in Montreal. It's a UN body. We just had our assembly, which brought all of the member states together in September. ICAO has established standards and recommended practices for security in every single airport in the member states. What we do additionally is we do audits of all of the last point of departure airports. So it would be airports like Charles de Gaulle, London Heathrow, the airport that is going to be the point where somebody departs from inbound to the United States. We do audits of those airports to make sure that they meet any additional requirements that we may have, because the reality is that the United States is the prime target for aviation terrorism, and recognizing that we do have additional requirements across the board internationally. But the ICAO work is, they're basically replicating the incredible work they've done for years in aviation safety, and look at the aviation safety record globally. It's amazing, and map that into security over the last 21 years.
Yeah, I think a lot of people may not realize that you have an international TSA office. You have people assigned to embassies around the world. You do regular audits of overseas security. And yet anybody who travels internationally knows it's not all the same, that there are different layers of security. Does that keep you awake at night?
Well, we work really closely with all of our partners around the globe. We have really good intelligence information that helps guide the work that we do. The key to this is to ensure you have a good trust relationship with your parallel organization in those last point of departure airports, and importantly, also with the airports themselves. Both TSA and CBP have a keen interest in this, right? Because CBP is going to admit all those passengers into the United States. We work very closely on making sure we identify passengers that might require additional screening, that might need additional screening of their check bags, things of that nature. So it's very much a network that we have in place. But certainly, there's a lot of things that can keep me up at night. That might be one of them. Yeah.
To follow up on that, the point being, you share your watch list, if that's the right word, with other countries, and you try to coordinate watch lists. Would that be fair to say, or our closest allies?
What we do is, there is a watch listing process in the United States government that all the agencies in the government subscribe to and use the information from. We don't necessarily share our watch lists, but we might indicate that we have a concern about a particular passenger as we see that flight reservation come up. And then a lot depends on the country, too. A Five Eyes partner, we're going to have a lot more information sharing with a Five Eyes partner because of that relationship. So we work very hard to make sure that we don't withhold information, but sometimes we might not reveal all that we know, obviously.
The one concern I've heard many times as I've talked to people in this business for years and years and years is that, especially in the EU, now I say this having a European wife, so I'm all partial to the EU, but that not all airports in the EU are necessarily adhering to the same level. So yeah, Charles de Gaulle and Amsterdam and Brussels and London, whatever, they're probably at the highest level. But if you're coming from a smaller airport, they may have staffing challenges, budgetary challenges, and yet if you check in at that airport, then you can go all the way from that smaller airport in Europe all the way into the United States, and you won't pass through a Charles de Gaulle security necessarily, or London security. So is that a concern for you? Is the level of security across the EU and other countries as well, but the EU's got that 15-nation or 18-nation now, universe, that security across the entire EU is at the same level?
Sure, and part of what we do is we also do security at the gates. So we require certain measures to be taken at the gates for flights that depart or going to certain locations in the United States. It's a very complicated process. Additionally, we always look at the passenger name record. In other words, the whole history of travel for that passenger between TSA and CBP. So there is awareness where we might have additional concerns, and we put measures in place to address them.
Okay, to that end, you are right now pushing, and Congress is considering this one-stop plan, which essentially would mean that if you're flying from, once you're cleared and once you're flying into the United States, but you are going to arrive in Newark and you're going on to Denver, or you're going to arrive at LAX and you go on to, you name the airport, Detroit, whatever, that you won't go through security screening again. Once you're screened, that's it. You can go all the way through, and that's called one stop. Why does that make sense? Why do you want to see that happen?
Sure. One stop makes a lot of sense because, one, first and foremost, it improves security. So the flights in a one-stop airport, in a one-stop country, will be by definition more secure than if one stop wasn't in place. And so it improves security. It absolutely improves efficiency, right? We can't continue to try to grow the number of people we have in our checkpoints by the 4% year-over-year growth we expect in passenger volume growth. So there is a need to become more efficient in what we do. Thirdly, it provides a much better experience for those passengers. Now, what's enabling a lot of this are technological advancements. We can literally transmit an image of a checked bag, for example, within seconds from a potential one-stop airport to the United States so that CBP and TSA can take a look at that bag, determine whether or not we want to provide additional screening for that bag. So, One Stop, I think, is a great idea. I'm fully supportive of it. We expect to have the legal authorization to do it because there's a law in the United States that says that all domestic U.S. travel, all those travelers need to be screened by a U.S. federal officer. We've asked the Congress to give us the ability to prototype at 6 last point of departure airports for 6 years. And so we'll run this prototype to see how it works. We wouldn't ask for a prototype if we didn't think it was going to work well. So looking forward to that.
But that means that you're even now more dependent on that overseas screening, that is going to be at the same level that you would receive domestically in the United States.
We are, but what that means is that that screening has to be commensurate with our screening. And the reverse is also true, by the way. I mean, we have international partners that already have one-stop agreements outbound from the United States. And so what they do is they accept our screening as commensurate with theirs. So to me, this is a really good idea because it increases overall global aviation security. And everybody has paid very, very close attention, not just to the process of screening, but the technology, the software that's loaded onto machines, things of that nature. So overall, this will raise the baseline of aviation security and certainly provide the efficiency and the experience benefits we want.
You've talked a lot about international cooperation. What kind of lessons have you learned, has the TSA learned, and Homeland learned from our overseas partners, whether it's the Japanese or the Brits or the Israelis, that we've been able to apply to our operation here?
Sure. One of the things we've learned is, it's incredibly helpful to have somebody from a different culture look at your system because, the United States has people from all over the world in our system. Many of our international partners do as well. So having somebody from a different culture look at your system, provide some recommendations on it is very, very helpful overall. The other thing is that, just the higher level of communication between us that these one-stop agreements are going to drive, I think is really important for us being able to figure out, hey, what are we seeing in a trend, for example, that might affect aviation security that we can collectively address rather than individually try to address.
Have we all, and I'm saying all of us collectively, have we gotten a little complacent about aviation security? It's been 21 years since 9/11, and we go through the motions, we go through the checkpoints. Sometimes I think you would be forgiven for thinking that a TSA officer's eyes are glazing over. Have we collectively gotten a little complacent? Do we need to remind ourselves what the stakes are?
We do, and we do that within TSA. We remind our officers all the time about 9/11, and we're not trying to relive just the 9/11 style attacks. We're just trying to emphasize that there are people in this world that want to attack our system, some domestic and some international, and you need to be alert all the time. And sometimes something that might appear to be very benign, or somebody who might appear to be very much in compliance, may not be. So you just can't make that assumption. The other thing that we're working on very hard is how do we embed more technology into what we're doing? Because if you think of that officer that's standing in that checkpoint, they're on 8-hour shifts, oftentimes work longer hours than the 8-hour shifts. There can be a fatigue factor, no doubt, in the work that we do. And so, there's no reason why, for example, we can't use machine learning, artificial intelligence to automatically detect knives, for example, in carry-on bags. And so I envision a day in the not-too-distant future where, as a passenger, you'll put your bag down on the belt. That bag might go through, and the officer may never see the image because the technology says there's nothing in this bag that is inconsistent with our security standards. So that will improve efficiency. It will also, importantly, when the image does come up, the officer's going to say, okay, this is a big deal because the machine did all of the routine checks that I'm now doing. I really need to focus on where this anomaly might be. Lastly, we are prototyping the ability to take those images, because there's no reason why that officer has to sit right next to that machine. Absolutely no reason why they need to do that. Technologically, you can port those images anywhere you want to. You need to do it securely, obviously, but we're prototyping taking those officers off the floor, putting them in a separate room, because if you think about it, an officer sitting behind one machine is seeing one machine's images, right? And so we're not able sometimes to connect the dots, if you will. Let's say a person brings a set of handcuffs. Handcuffs are not prohibited, but if we saw that we were seeing like 20 handcuffs across 3 lanes, that might cause a level of concern. And so bringing all the image reading into one location will help us identify where those concerns are.
And that location could be anywhere. It could be in Wichita, a big operation that watches every airport?
Yeah, so initially we're going to start out, that location will be at the airport, but we'll eventually move it to regionally and then nationally, because you could have 2, 3, or 4, you're going to have redundancy, of course, sites around the country where you do the X-ray image reading. And really think about it. I mean, you don't have to have people living in Washington, D.C. with the cost of living here, or in New York, or in Chicago, right?
That's fascinating. Okay, well, you opened the door to technology, and you are now looking at facial recognition, that we will check into our flights, and you will verify I am who I am based on my face, much like Customs and Border Protection already does for people incoming and outbound. And now you want to do that for a domestic flight across the country, right? Just using my face, I don't need a ticket anymore.
Yeah, we do want to do that, and we're prototyping it in some locations to see how it works and to make sure that that there are no error rates beyond what we're already aware of in the technology that we're using. The fundamental fact is that if you have a person looking at an image and trying to match up that image, particularly in a driver's license, with the person standing in front of them, it's very, very hard to do, and their accuracy rate is somewhere in the 80s, 80%. When you use facial recognition technology, the accuracy rate goes 98, 99%. It's significantly different. It's a lot faster. One of the things that we always do with all of our biometric work, because we know there's a lot of sensitivity to biometrics, rightly so, is we lead off with the privacy protections we're putting in place. People have concerns that, hey, you're taking my image, what are you doing with that image? And so all of our privacy impact statements are posted on our websites so for people to see, and if anybody has a question, they can ask somebody in the checkpoint what we do. But the reality is that we have no desire to retain a facial image. So once your facial image is checked biometrically, that's erased as soon as you leave that station in the checkpoint.
Well, you anticipated my question there, and in fact, San Francisco is not going to allow, at least right now, San Francisco does not allow facial recognition technology, fearing the slippery slope of a China, for example. Are you guaranteeing that my face and where I'm going and all of my information, who I'm traveling with, is not kept in the system if you go to this?
Yes, well, we don't keep it in the system. We don't want to. I mean, we would have to protect that information.
That feels like Big Brother is why people are worried.
Right.
But Big Brother knows I'm going to Denver or wherever.
Yeah. Well, I think people feel that, they see the camera systems in airports. You see camera systems in grocery stores. I mean, they're all over the place. And they think that we're tracking somebody from the checkpoint all the way through where they're going persistently. We are not doing that. We have camera systems in our checkpoint just so we can see an interaction if it comes up to be an issue later on. Let's say something got into the stereo of an airport that shouldn't. We use that camera technology to figure out, hey, what happened here? Why did that occur? Or if somebody has a complaint about something, we can look at the video to see what actually occurred in that exchange between a passenger and an officer.
How good are these scanners? If I suddenly grow a beard, or if you grow your hair long, which would be a good look for you, would you be able to, would the camera still identify you as that individual?
Yes.
That's it?
Yep.
Yes.
Yes. Yep.
All right. Listen, travelers right now are limited to small quantities of liquids and gels, and everybody wants their liquids and gels. Is the technology advancing to the point where we can start carrying liquids and gels in the coming years, or where do we stand on the technology to detect liquid explosives?
Yeah, it's all about the amount. So 3.4 ounces is the limit in a quart bag. What we did during the pandemic, if people wanted to bring hand sanitizer through, we allowed 12 ounces of hand sanitizer. What that required us to do, though, is to be able to characterize that sanitizer to make sure it was really sanitizer. So it's a little bit more process step for us. We're looking at technologies that will be able to allow us to characterize liquids more quickly and more accurately. One of the things that we will always do, though, is we want to encourage people to join our Trusted Traveler programs, either CBP's Global Entry Program or TSA's PreCheck program. To join it, it costs you a little money just to offset our cost to do the security check that's involved there, but you also provide your biometrics, your fingerprints and your facial image to both CBP and to TSA. What we will always focus on is putting our newest technology in the pre-check lanes to give our pre-check passengers that experience and that convenience. And then if we do look at potentially in the future modifying our liquids requirements, liquids, aerosols, and gels, we will always prototype that in pre-check first, because this is a trusted population. We'll see how it works. We'll see what things evolve from that. So
there's testing. Your incentive right now. Get your pre-check. Get your fast lane access. Listen, I got to ask you about Homeland Security is now yet again postponing the Real ID law. It was, by the way, this was a law passed by Congress after 9/11 to try to essentially make every state comply with the same standard for driver's licenses or identifications, because some of the 9/11 hijackers used fraudulent information to obtain driver's licenses. And here we are 21 years after 9/11. We still don't have the singular policy rolled out nationwide, and Homeland Security is delaying this yet again. The Real ID Act now delayed until 2025. I think people are forgiven for asking why. Why is this such a problem?
Yeah, it's a problem because the adoption rate on the part of the states who issue all the driver's licenses in the country is not at the level where we need to be able to successfully implement this. I mean, you can imagine.
By the way, what is that level? What level of compliance do you need?
We need about 70%. And
70.
And we're below 50. And some states are well below 50. Some states are close to 90, 95%. So there's a wide variance across the states. I think Real ID is critically important, because what that says is that when you're holding this credential, this driver's license, it really, really is you compared to the current standards that we have in place.
So is it just a matter of individuals not wanting to go through the hassle of bringing all of these forms of ID to their driver's license office to get that Real ID? Is that why it's so slow?
I think that's part of it. And so what we're working on now is a rulemaking that will allow them to electronically transmit those documents to their DMV, so they don't need to physically carry them. But that's going to have to go through the whole notice and comment rulemaking process. That will take many, many months, if not years, to be able to do that. But we want to make it more convenient for people to get the credential in the first place.
All right, bottom line is that's going to be in 2025. I got one last question for you, because guess what? TSA has yet another, you got many more obligations on your plate. You are also in charge of pipeline security, oil and gas pipeline security. Like, you don't have enough to do already. Now you got to worry about that. But this came to the public's attention when we had the Colonial Pipeline hack last year. Oil and gas shut down to the entire eastern seaboard. And that was a ransomware attack, a cyber attack.
have the pipelines upped their game? Are they now able to withstand, or at least hopefully defend against, a similar attack, given the fact that we right now are in a cold to hot war with Russia, and we know what those threats involve?
Sure. Well, the reason why that's in TSA's remit is we're the Transportation Security Agency and formed out of the Department of Transportation. So what happened was, if you looked at all the modal administrations that are in DOT, Secretary Normanetta at the time made a decision to take all of the security functions, transfer them to this new Transportation Security Administration. So it was a clean break of security requirements across every single modal administrator in DOT. With the pipelines, yeah, that was a lot of work by the pipeline companies, a lot of work by us, and I think we're in a really good spot at this point in time. And huge credit goes to the owners and operators of the pipeline systems that we've now regulated for all the work they've done over the past year and a half. A really important thing, though, that we did, and this is a direction that I think the rest of government will eventually go into, is rather than prescribe specifically what somebody needs to do in this regulatory framework, we chose to establish performance standards. And we said, hey, you need to provide access control. You need to provide a risk-based system to patch your systems. You need to segment your information technology from your operating technology. We didn't say how to do it. And so we went back to the regulated parties and said, here's the performance metric. Come back and tell us specifically how you're going to accomplish it. We've gotten all those proposals from the pipeline companies now. They look really good. And so what this does is it gives the owners operators a little bit more flexibility, allows them to use some of their current cybersecurity protocols that are in place, which are quite good in some cases. And then the important part is, once we approve that implementation plan, we require the pipeline companies and the rail companies, and soon the airlines and airports, to tell us specifically how they're going to measure the achievement of that objective. So there's accountability, objective accountability in this process. And the cool thing about it is we don't need to rewrite a regulation when technology changes. I mean, we expect that owners and operators are going to keep pace with technology, and we don't need to go through a whole process to get there from here.
Admiral David Pekoske in his second term as the TSA Administrator, the TSA Chief, and he is watching over all things transportation related. Admiral, thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Appreciate it.
Admiral Pekoske, thank you so much for not sleeping at night so we all can. Thank you for being here with us. Thank you so much, Tom. Thank you. We are now doing what is unheard of at the